All right, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Kristen Lambert, and I'm the director of the SCALE Award and a member of Mercy Corps' Agriculture Systems Technical Support Team. Thank you all for joining us for the conversation today. It would be great as you join us if you could please introduce yourself in the chat box, which agency you're joining from, your role, where you're located, so we can get a sense of who's in the room. As you know, we're here to talk about resilience design for water and landscapes with a focus on the story of the Sponge Village of Atego. And I know I speak for all of our presenters when I say we've really been looking forward to sharing this work. And this was truly a collaborative effort, as you can see here, between DANITA, the Danish Refugee Council, USAID, and the SCALE Award, amongst others, which you'll be hearing about shortly. Next slide, please. I do want to share that simultaneous interpretation will be available today in French. If you look to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a round interpretation button. If you click on that, you should be hearing our simultaneous French interpretation shortly. If you have any trouble with this at all, just leave a remark in the Q&A box and we'll help you get sorted. Next slide, please. And then for those of you who may not be familiar with SCALE, I just wanted to share a quick word about what we're about. The SCALE Award is a 5-year BHA, Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, funded learning award. Our mandate is to provide support to any of BHA's food security programs in both emergency and non-emergency contexts, with the focus on their work related to agriculture, natural resource management, and on and off farm livelihoods. Through this award, we provide capacity strengthening, knowledge sharing, knowledge capture, and experiences such as this webinar, where we have the opportunity to learn from other partners and to put forward the best practices and resources. So you can check out our website at thefsnnetwork.org, and we'll have some more contact information at the end. Next slide, please. So to lead us through today's conversation, we have 2 lead presenters. We have Natalie Topa, who's joining us from the Danish Refugee Council, where she serves as the Global Advisor for Regenerative Resilience and Circular Bioeconomy. We also have Warren Brush joining us, currently based on the West Coast of the United States. He's a Global Resilience Design Consultant, as well as an educator, a lecturer, and an implementer. And Natalie and Warren together help to lead the training that we'll be discussing today. As we move forward, I would just want to encourage you to really use that chat box to share any questions that you might have, to share resources and experiences with one another, and to use your Q&A box at the bottom. If you click on that icon, you can flag to us particularly questions that we might raise to the panelists at the end of this discussion. So with that, I think we can go ahead and dive right in. I'll turn over to you, Warren.
Thank you so much. You can go to the next slide. Okay, it's really wonderful to be here. Thank you all for joining us. I wanted to just start off from a big picture view of looking at a lot of the issues that we are all facing globally in relation to climate change. And with the recent release of the IPCC research and their recommendations that they have for massive change in how we integrate and live and develop our systems of support for human settlement all over the world have to change. And so we are really looking at how climate change issues are such a, it seems like they're so out of our hands to be able to touch, and yet so much of how we feel climate change comes back to land degradation. And so our approach is about how to convert the floods that come through into food and production, and how to embody water in the land to be able to minimize the droughts that we experience in the land. So as a program, one of the things that we've done in developing, and next slide, please. One of the things that we've done to really look at how to address the land degradation issues is to look at what global movements have been doing regenerative design. So things like permaculture, things like agroforestry, a lot of the indigenous movements, the holistic grazing, biointensive farming, and on and on. There's a list there that I've put in here that we drew from to be able to look at how that could be brought into the humanitarian and development space. Next slide, please. And during the last 7 years, we've been developing the permagarden and the resilience design in smallholder farming systems framework that is what we are calling resilience design, which was originally through TOPS and then through SCALE. And what we've done is we've taken a lot of that permaculture design, the agroforestry, the agroecology, and we've brought it into the language and the understanding of how to move it through a program in the development and humanitarian space. And so that ended up being a very important part of this process that we did with the Danish Refugee Council. Next slide, please. And what we really have been focusing on by doing this is really looking at the foundation of what builds resilience in a landscape and understanding that all economies are reliant on healthy ecologies. And if we don't address a healthy ecology and reverse land degradation and restore landscapes, we are not going to have healthy economies, healthy access to nutrition, even our disease environment starts to expand. So our focus has been really around geology, hydrology, and biology. So looking at the landform, looking at the soil building processes, looking at how to plant the rain, and we to be able to buffer the needs of water in the landscape so that when we do have extended droughts, we actually have a lot of embodied water in that landscape, as well as having a biodiverse landscape. And so that's when we start to look at the biology. And then how to program it so those three things build off of one another. And as a programmer, and I see there's other folks who have signed on here from, I see Tom Cole, who's also one of the trainers here, that we have been working at doing this in a long time, and being able to work on the biology, the hydrology, and the geology is something that can be done from the household right through to the entire watershed. And so today's story, we're going to tell you a little bit about how we've done that. And I'm going to hand this over to Natalie to take us from here.
Great, thanks, Warren. My name is Natalie Topa with the Danish Refugee Council, and today we're going to walk through the main components of this Sponge Village primer. And this is really a tool just to help people start to understand what's possible in a landscape. How can we start to bring water security, long-term water security, food, nutrition, soil security? And so, when I came up with this idea of the Sponge Village, I really wanted us to show that we can address an entire landscape and an entire community. And that was when the SCALE team reached out to me to say, hey, we would love to document the work that you're doing. So we created this document so that we can start to provide a glimpse into tangible and short-term impacts, especially in brittle and fragile contexts. Really focusing on the sort of this ecological foundation to resilience, to lead to resilience to many different types of shocks and stresses. Warren mentioned that there is no economy without ecology. So we can't move forward as a human family unless we have these ecosystem functions intact. So we hope that this primer provides a glimpse into what we've done. We can go to the next slide. So at DRC, I work with the Danish Refugee Council. For the last 4 years, I've been the East Africa Regional Resilience and Livelihoods Coordinator, and I've since moved to this global position to really roll this out into all of our regions. So, the resilience design framework is one of the many tools that we use, but essentially now within our regional and our global strategies, we have integrated regenerative design and circular approaches to a lot of the different work that we do. So this is applicable in a humanitarian and displacement context, in recovery and development, as well as the root causes of displacement. So this is something that DRC is really committed to, and again, bringing in all these different kinds of movements, using lots of different tools, including the resilience design framework that we work on with Warren in Uganda and Kenya, and we've done in Somalia. But this is something that, this general approach is something that we are moving out to all regions across the world. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just walk through a couple of examples. These are design principles that we apply to small and large scale contexts, urban and rural contexts, as well as in different sectors. When we start to design this way in an integrated manner, with my team members from DRC that are involved in water, sanitation, infrastructure, shelter, protection, food security, economic recovery, all of those are our team members in resilience. Here on the left-hand side, we're designing a circular market where slaughter waste and human nutrient, also known as human manure, are flowed into these biogas cells that will be generating methane, and that will be sold in the market as fuel to compete with the deforestation products. The second picture is in our Dadaab compound here in Kenya, where we have used food production systems and a designed permaculture garden to mitigate the flooding pressure that was on our office building. On the right-hand side, this is our Yemen team doing amazing work with large-scale groundwater recharge. Farmers in Yemen have an additional 1 month of irrigation water because of these systems. Down on the left, we've got Burundi, where we're really using the contours, actually, and the next picture as well, using the natural contours of the land to trap and catch all of those nutrients and moisture that we need to grow food. We apply this to large-scale infrastructure under NURI and other programs. And then lastly, this is a picture just of how we are planting trees and establishing and protecting that agrobiodiversity in the agro ecosystems where we work. Next slide. So I'm going to talk for a moment about the NURI project. NURI stands for the Northern Uganda Resilience Initiative. It addresses 13 districts where we are working in Northern Uganda, because those are districts that have been affected by displacement with refugees coming in from other countries. So the NURI program is actually part of a larger initiative of the Danish Embassy, the Royal Danish Embassy, and DANIDA in Uganda, called Upside. And that program is focused on private sector support to farmers, market-related infrastructure. And so for our program, NURI actually has 2 different components. One is with an organization called AFARD, and they are focusing on climate-smart agriculture. DRC is focusing on rural infrastructure, including market access roads, as well as water resources management. And so a lot of that work is really exemplified in the Sponge Village example that we're going to show. So we do focus on the subcatchment. We work directly with local government, technical staff from government offices, engineers, as well as communities and the community leadership. So we work with farmers, we work with women, we work with local leadership on a very large scale in a huge program. I think we're over 20 catchments in total. So so DANIDA has funded this program called NURI, and Warren and I provide support to the NURI technical team and engineers on how to apply this regenerative lens of resilience into the design of roads, of dams, of springs. And so that's what we're going to walk through today, is this program from DANIDA that funded this training under the project. It was a 2-week training that Warren and I did. We had 170 people. We had 6 machines, including 2 excavators, 2 bulldozers, 2 dump trucks. And so probably what is the cost of 2 boreholes, we are trying to show how we integrate permanent water security for this community and their livestock. Next slide. So what is a sponge village? When I chose that name Sponge Village, I was trying to think of a universal symbol for absorption. And so when we talk about Sponge Village, it's a village with a landscape that holds and stores and captures all of the energy and resource flows that are crossing across the landscape, which when they come too much and too intensively, they can have a destructive power. What we want is to pacify and calm those resources down and water flows so that they can saturate and really soak deeply into the soils that provide the biological uplift that we need for biodiversity, food, fodder, and water security. So that's where this idea came from of a sponge village. It soaks up goodness and it holds it for the long term. Next slide. Warren, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great, thank you, Natalie. Well, I think one of the things that really sets this training apart with resilience design and with how we uniquely structured this with the Danish Refugee Council is that the whole workshop is not in a hotel. We spend maybe a day at a site doing some of the theory, sometimes up to 2 days, and then the rest of the 2 weeks we are literally in the field with our gumboots. And Natalie likes to call it not a workshop, but a work hard shop. And it's something where we are tooling up the staff at the NGO and the other partners who are participating. And I think that's another really important part of our training process is that we are involving various government officials, other partners. And then another thing that's been really unique with the Danish Refugee Council is that at these trainings, we have representation from many different sectors that are actually taking place, learning how they could connect into this through their lens, through their sector. And we found that to be very, very helpful. And so this training moves from basically learning in the classroom to learning in the field very quickly. And part of the whole process is to actually model for the staff who will be cascading this out through their agencies, their program plans over the following months and years, is how to do this in the field itself. So rather than just giving some theory and then letting them figure it out, we actually go into the field and we build the demonstration site together, training the community using the best practices that we've evolved over time. Go ahead and next slide, please. So part of that journey is really community engagement, and the community engagement begins for us with the agency developing a relationship with our community over time. And then when the program, the resilience design program, comes into the community with the training, we do what we call the story of place, which is a way where we listen to them about their history, we listen to them about what is happening now in the community, and most importantly, we ask them, what are they dreaming? What are they envisioning for their future, for themselves as well as their grandchildren? And then what we try to do is we try to align that with the work that we're bringing in and offering with them so that we're supporting them in their own vision. Go ahead and next slide, please. And so a part of that process of community engagement is doing what we call a community resource walk, which is really mapping the resources in the community. And that's also what sets us apart with the work we're doing, because we are not bringing in outside resources to build these systems. We're looking at what is available there. We're asking them to be able to teach us about what are the things that they know about a landscape. And oftentimes the people that are there, they'll share with us that this was the first time that a NGO who had come into their community had actually asked them what they know. And then in addition to that, what we're doing is we're saying this is available to build our soil building systems. These are the resources that are available right at hand, so that as the program we're working with might end, they will still have the resources they need to replicate this beyond our time there. And that becomes really important, that we're not presenting something to them that they can't replicate. I'm going to hand it back to you, Nat.
Thanks, Warren. I really love that point, and I love it when we do this in the field. And I think I just want to stress the point about, we can move on to the next slide. You know, this point about really honoring and respecting and appreciating the ethnobotany of place. And I think that, you know, some of the amazing experiences we've had, Warren, in the field is when, you know, when we have refugees from South Sudan and women from Uganda who we're like, oh, you use that plant for, you know, children's stomach aches. Well, we use it to, you know, do some other thing. And there's this wonderful exchange and shared learning dialogue around that indigenous knowledge and ethnobotanical resources across contiguous borders in displacement. I love it. It's so exciting. What else is exciting? Fill and spill. So I'm going to walk us through the design of the Sponge Village. And, you know, Warren talked about geology, hydrology, and biology. To really simplify that, what we're talking about is earthworks and how we move earthworks and, you know, how we organize and engineer the landscape by building and moving around the soil so that it can support the hydrology. That's the water. And then the biology, you know, the water, the internal infiltration, as well as the surface water retention. And then lastly, the biological component I'll talk about in terms of the plants, the food, the trees, and all of that. So when we talk about a fill and spill circuit, water comes tumbling down a mountain. And we always want to start catching that. You know, we live on a planet with gravity for now, and we want to catch that before it starts to accumulate and grow into floods towards the valley. The same way when you come out of a shower, you don't start drying your feet first. Maybe you do, but most people might start at the head. So we want to stop that water before it starts coming down. So this design, and we can go on to the next slide. We started at the top of the system and created a fill and spill network. So water is captured and it fills up and then moves to the system. But before we did all that, what we did was we were led by the community through their site. So we had to, you know, lace up our boots, put on our gum boots, get some pangas and spray on some mosquito repellent. And we started to walk into the bushy watershed around. And we started, you know, we were listening to the community explain their challenges, the opportunities, the resources they have. But at the same time, we were observing what we see in the landscape. And some of the things that we saw was, you know, and heard were that number one, along the road, huge amounts of water pass by the road. This is a community that says they have no water. So just imagine, there they are watching all this water just pass right by them on the road. Then we saw that there is a village with their homes there, mostly earthen homes. There was a cattle kraal, which is, you know, a great resource and source of nutrient. As we moved up, we saw tree stumps, we saw charcoal pits, we saw major erosion around the water paths where floods accumulate. And sadly, in this valley on the right, it gets so flooded nowadays that the community is actually cut off from the neighboring communities. So to go and see their friends or sell things, they have to go all the way around. And so in the next slide, what we started to do is talk about and sensitize our teams, the government officials that are with us, the community leaders and the community around some of the key resources that are there that flow through the site, like sunshine, which, you know, what is the solar orientation? Where's that hot burning west sun? What about the wind and the slope? So I always talk about three thieves of water. The three thieves of water are sun, because it evaporates the moisture, wind also evaporates, and then the gravity or slope. So the three thieves of water, sun, wind, and slope, are what we're trying to get our community members in the training to sharpen their eyes about, because everything that we do is about stopping those thieves. Next slide. So it's all of this input and understanding that we were gaining from the community and from our observations. We started to stitch together a design. Starting at the very top, we created a valley dam. Now, why would we do that at the top and not the bottom? It's because we don't want to lose the important opportunity of catching and storing water higher up in the landscape. It has seepage that comes from the dams that helps to soak. And also there's a lot of gravity systems for irrigation and things that we don't want to lose that opportunity. We want to divorce ourselves from fossil fuels, and where we can save our money and save, on emissions by using gravity. So moving down the system, we created a catchment drain that led into bioswales, and then those fill up and spill, fill up and spill into the contour dam, then the hand dug dam, and then all the way down to that valley, which was the natural original path, which is now has gully plugs in that. So everything that we're doing is trying to slow spread and sink that water so that it hydrates and quenches deep into the soil and that interstitial spaces between the soil. That's what we call green water. You can see we took water off of the road and delivered it to a permagarden, this thirsty permagarden. I say thirsty because I like to think of the system as having throats in the landscape. What I mean by that is we're creating these places where the soil and all the plants can drink and drink, they swallow and quench that thirst. And that is how we develop a sponge. So this is not to scale. We'll go to the next slide and you can see from an aerial view what that actually looks like. Oh, I think so here's the same system. What's not shown here is the valley dam, but here you can see that there's two main systems that I want to make sure I point out. One are the infiltration systems. Bioswales on contour are for infiltrating and soaking that water into the soil. Surface water retention systems are the dams that people can access for livestock watering, for domestic household use, and things like that. And I just want to also mention that this is not the original state of challenges that this community had. They had an intact forest. And when you have an intact forest, up to 90% of water that falls in a rain will remain right there in the forest. It doesn't accumulate and join with other waters to create flood. It soaks into that forest floor and it feeds that interstitial structure under the soil to feed the soil microorganisms and create that bioavailability for the biological uplift of trees, plants, grasses, shrubs, food, fodder, all of that. So this is the idea of the sponge village and the overall design. I'm going to hand it off to Warren to talk about some of the specific structures.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Natalie. One of the things that we find a lot when we get out to the community is we ask them, what is their most limiting factor to being able to have good production? And oftentimes what we hear, and most of the time what we hear, is actually water being a limiting factor with the smallholder farmers who are doing only rain-fed agriculture. And so, yeah, when we get there, we see in the research we do around the site is that there is lots of water actually falling. And so, like Natalie said, if it's not sponging, it's actually moving across that landscape. And oftentimes it's moving through the landscape at just a couple of meters a second. And so if we can slow spread, sink, and save that water in the ground, what we do is essentially slow it down so that it could be a part of the biological processes, so that it's now moving like 6 meters a year through the interstitial places of the soil. So here in this picture, you're seeing a couple of the bioswales that we built as a part of that overall strategy. And another thing I wanted to mention is that we never use just one strategy. There's not like a silver bullet of technology. Like if you put a swale in, then everything's going to be fine. Each site is context specific. And I think that's where, as programs, we have to start to think differently about how we design our interventions on the ground. Next slide, please. So looking at one of the structures that we did, and actually there's several, we did both a valley dam up at the top that she had mentioned. We also did a contour dam. And I just wanted to mention that oftentimes I find programs aren't ever looking at sites other than in the valley to develop dams. But oftentimes, if you are able to place a dam outside of the valley, you protect it from the flooding that could happen down the valley in an extreme event. And so people ask, well, then where do you get the water? Well, one of the things we do is we attach those contour dams and even ridge point dams to bioswales that increase their catchment area. And it allows us to place these structures at the best place in the landscape for the community as well. So here you can see we're right above the village, right where they can access that water. It's also a structure that's protecting the village from flooding as well. Next slide, please. And so looking at the other thing the other intervention we wanted to demonstrate at this particular village was a hand dug dam. And so we could show how this could be done with the large equipment. Now, a lot of people ask, well, why are you bringing in large equipment if they can't replicate it? And one of the things that I like to tell people is that the large equipment can do key hydrological interventions for a larger landscape. They can help to stabilize the hydrology in the landscape, and then interstitially between the interventions that you do with the larger equipment, you can do a lot. You can do infinite amount of slowing, spreading, and sinking all on a hand level. So here's just an example of the hand dug dam, which is part of a suite of multiple strategies, and Natalie will take us down a few more of some of the things that we did to attach these water resources to biological production. Natalie?
Great, thanks, Warren. That little hand dug dam is my favorite. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to talk about food and biodiversity security. This is the biology, right? If we want to have healthy food and fodder and biology for ourselves for market, that has to start with the soil and the water. So here we go on the plants. We really try to integrate as much as possible indigenous food systems where we can, and not just food, but the indigenous biodiversity of a landscape because of those chemical relationships, right? It's the microbiology in the soil that transforms the material it's getting into the soil chemistry. So ensuring that we are anchoring our food forests, our forestry systems with that natural native species is very, very key. But what we do is layer in things that provide food, fodder, fiber, could be baskets or homes or whatever, furniture, food, fodder, fiber, fuel, fertility for the soil, and even pharmaceuticals, wink, wink, with a F. So what we want to do is layer in tall things, just like in a real natural forest. That's what we're trying to mimic. Tall, big trees, shorter trees, climbing things, crawling things, all in a symbiotic relationship that provides shade and microclimate and fungal networks to support each other. Next slide. So one of the things that we heard from the community is the loss of many of the original heritage species, the indigenous foods. And sometimes we refer to them as the old friends, old trees and shrubs that we haven't seen forever. Maybe they're even endangered or going extinct. And the community said, when we moved with our animals, there were so many foods that we recognized, and we would like to have those back. So we got to work with establishing a food forest that anchors, that first provides FMNR, or strategic pruning, to existing trees. This is also a community that keeps bees and makes honey. But then we layered in those food, fodder, fiber, fuel. And then what we want is, perennial stability, permanent biological infrastructure in the landscape that will drink that water and deliver carbon, nitrogen, water down into the roots and into the soil. So as great as it is that we're planting trees, there is a real natural infrastructure that we're trying to instate here to protect the community long-term with soil security and hydrology. But we're also layering in nutrient-dense foods and fruits for the home and the animals, as well as for market. Okay, so we have a lot of layering into the food forest. And when we design them, every single tree has an individual water harvesting structure that we pack full of all kinds of great materials like manures and charcoal dust and mulch. And then each individual tree will fill up with water and spill in a fish scale pattern from one tree to the next, to the next, to the next. It's great. Next slide. Sorry for the delay. We've got an image-rich presentation. So we also established a permaculture garden. I know I can see a lot of my East African friends here who are really familiar with permaculture. So I won't go into all the specifics, but some of the key things that we wanted to ensure in this garden was passive water harvesting structures to create, security checkpoints for water. We don't want water escaping. We want to manage how it leaves. Soil building and soil protection from both chemicals. We don't want chemicals, even fertilizers, and also erosion. And then lots of diversity, right? Lots of different types of plants. Insects get confused. They're just like, this is a waste of time. Let's go to that monocrop in another place. Lots of perennial stability for permanent year-round evergreen farms. No naked farms, please, without trees. All farms should have trees. three-dimensional and vertical. We're not just farming on the ground. We're also using trellises, fence lines, trees. We want to create microclimate and habitat for all those birds and insects that protect and pollinate our garden. And then lastly, we really focus on informal market systems that provide informal seed market systems that provide organic, open pollinated, locally adapted seeds, because those can be reused again and again and again, whereas GMOs and improved seeds cannot. So if we go to the next slide. And I know I've got organizers who are prompting me to wrap it up. So this is just really quickly, we did take water off of the road, that road that had flooding. We took the excavator and created like a little green highway through the community that delivers water from the road down into the perma garden. Next slide. And that water, instead of, originally it takes a path down to the Nile River where it creates flooding on the Nile River. Are we going to the next slide? Yeah, there we go, perfect. And then in the Nile River, that creates so much swelling and then ferries can't pass. And so you have a whole disruption of the local economy. So the point that's really important is by doing all these small strategies on individual farms and homes, we can actually reduce flooding pressure for an entire community and economic market system. All right, so this is what it looks like where the juncture, where the swale from the road pours into the permagarden. That's what that looks like. So the water is taken off and then it goes into a fill and spill system in the permagarden before it goes out its exit point. Next slide. So I think as the slide is changing, it's probably going to be on biointensive planting and So here, this just shows how we create that water harvesting infrastructure. So we've got bioswales on contour. We always want to cover them with some kind of trellis. Originally, they're trees, right? Swales are tree planting systems. But while we're waiting for trees to grow, we can cover that with a trellis with passion vines and pumpkins that increases our surface area for growing while shading and protecting that precious moisture inside the swale. Next slide. So I'm pretty sure that this one now is on biointensive. Yeah, so when we make the garden beds, we make them parallel to the bioswales and we dig them about 80 centimeters deep, between 60 and 80 centimeters deep. We pack them full with all kinds of materials to add fertility, and we only dig this about one time in 5 years. We don't need to dig again. And then because we have packed so much fertility deep inside the soil with carbon and nitrogen, we can plant the seeds so close together because they don't have to compete with one another with their roots to access that nutrition. And then again, lastly, I just really want to focus on the importance of heritage security. We want to ensure that we are not making vulnerable local heritage seeds, traditional foods, indigenous seed stocks is something that really we have to protect. And that is so much about what the regenerative movement also has in store. So making sure that communities, their heritage, their culture is not destabilized by these important seed stocks that are often disappearing. So I think that is let's go to the next slide. Great. So I think that I'm going to hand it over to Kristen right now to lead us in a quick Q&A. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nat, and thanks, Warren. You guys really packed a lot of great information into a short amount of time. To our attendees, I want to encourage you again to drop any questions into that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to kick us off with a great question that we have coming in from ACDI VOCA that gets into kind of what does it take to do this work? Brian from ACDI VOCA asked, what are some of the largest inputs, the costs, and the challenges to achieving what has been done here and shared? So Warren and Nat, I'll turn over to you to respond to that.
Go ahead, Warren.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for the question, Brian. I think the number one input is knowledge. Honestly, it's understanding how to work with water, how to work with the slope, how to work with the sun. All things that can be taught and transferred within the community. Once they see that it demonstrates positively, we see that they can uptake that knowledge. Now, I think I'm looking at a couple of the other questions as well, and one of the things that gets asked a lot is like, well, I see these big machines there, and I'm wondering what the inputs, because obviously the community can't replicate that. And so part of our training is in the community, working beside the community so that they know how to tend the systems. They know how to replicate the smaller hand dug systems that happen in between, and that they understand also that the biodiversity, how to work with the biodiversity, how to work with, just how to coppice a plant so that you're not killing the plant versus to get firewood versus just doing a pruning that would allow that plant to regenerate over time. So there's a mix of different things that we do that are mostly knowledge-based. And then the other is basically the seeds are a big one. Like, we are looking for local seeds and local plant stock rather than what a lot of people are using called improved seeds. So because part of it is that they're going to replicate that, we don't want them to get into a debt cycle to be able to try to get the seeds that they need, as well as to develop the seeds based on the local climate issues. So the inputs are varied depending on the project, but I know maybe Nat, you could talk a little bit more about it from the agency perspective. I think from the community perspective, we're using all local inputs and local tools for the parts that they're involved in.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. I mean, we have this discussion all the time, is what does it take to scale this? I love when people ask, is it scalable? And I always think, well, yeah, to a planetary level. This is actually how our planet works, is with these principles. But I would say that the strength of this approach is also its challenge, because people have to understand the design principles. And I just want to illustrate a photo that I got this morning from a refugee camp in Uganda, where a former staff person of mine had went and trained people. They without any other inputs, there's no handouts, distribution, seeds, tools. Actually, they're in the process of waiting for them, but they just thought, we're going to go ahead and get to work using what we have. And they've started to design these right next to the homes, beautiful bioswales with beds, and no other input is required. This is a software exercise. It's not a hardware exercise, right? I mean, obviously we do purchase seeds and seedlings and normal hand tools that people can easily access in the local market. But really the nuance here is about how you sensitize, first of all, find the champions, right? Find the champions and build a movement around them, build support around them, and really exchange, be pollinator of knowledge. I mean, this is a WhatsApp group with refugees, and we're just sharing ideas. I send little feedback, drawings and stuff. So not every agency has time to do that, but it's really what it takes, because it's a daily exercise of, oh, try this, or don't forget to mulch, hire mulch ambassadors. Like, can we all have that as a job title? Mulch coordinator, nitrogen coordinator for our teams, because in so many agricultural programs, those are the things that fly out the door first. So knowledge is the main input. So what it takes to get it done is that it's not a costly, it doesn't do much for your burn rate if you have a huge program and these really inexpensive interventions. But when we're talking about real self-reliance for real human beings who need to eat real food, there's no other way to do it. There's no tech, no chemical, no drought resistant seed. It's not the seed that has to be drought resistant, it's the soil. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and great to see that example of the community that's built up around the WhatsApp group. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that topic around knowledge and cascading of knowledge as you reach scale, because we have a number of questions around farmer adoption and the sustainability. So I wanted to throw it back to you for reflections on that point. What have we learned about what it takes to support ongoing knowledge transfer? What are some of the tools and the mechanisms that have allowed for the message around resilience design to stay strong as it reaches more and more people? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, I think we could both answer that, Natalie. Maybe we will. I feel that there's one of the things that we have to look at is how do we, when in the cascading process, who's involved in it? And so right from the initial training that Natalie and I are doing, we're making sure that there are agricultural extension agents are a part of it, that the ag team leaders are a part of it, the other people in the agency. Now, that's another thing that's become really important, is that when we're working with an agency, that they actually have multiple representation, even from their management, taking part in this, so that they better know how to enable this over the long term. And so often we'll have a country director come in and take part in it, or we'll have someone you wouldn't usually think at a level training that we're doing, and so then we start to move it through the cascade process. And one of the things we found at Scale is that wherever you see programs that are doing knowledge-based interventions, that the technical the technical integrity of the program is what it often starts to decay further out into the cascade. So part of what we've done is, with the SCALE program, is to develop checklists based on minimum standards to make sure that they are easily understood in the field, and then also involving more of a mentoring process in the cascade. And I know, Nat, you probably have some other ideas around that too, but those were some key things that I've seen that have been really helpful, is just really understanding how to maintain the technical integrity. And when you do that, you start to see results. Oh, and one last thing is that we use demonstration sites. I talk about the 3 most important ways to make change in a community is demonstration, and the third and most important one is demonstration. And so, yeah, there we go. So all of our trainings, whether in every level of the cascade, is developing a demonstration site. And so it's not where we're just sitting somewhere and talking about, but we're actually doing an active learning process. Natalie?
Yeah, I completely agree. The places where we have most success is where everyone from the top management, for example, in our Kenya program, from the country director, head of programs, down to the area managers, to the livelihoods coordinator, are so all on board. Whereas if you just go and train junior staff, they don't necessarily feel empowered to do something that's like maybe feels like a departure from the norm, right? And so if the senior management doesn't know and understand the importance of why we're doing what we're doing, those junior staff people don't feel empowered, and then it's really easy that training skills and everything gets lost. So the other thing I was going to say is we're battling really wrong information around how to grow food for climate action, right? We have these conventional models of agriculture that use monocropping and tillage and chemicals, and that is harmful at every level. And so by doing this, shifting the conversation and the narrative, I also want to make a really quick point about, climate change and ecological degradation. Everyone is afraid of climate change. It's a very real and daunting thing. But where we can have an impact is around our homes and camps and settlements and in watersheds, even at the bioregional level. And in order to do that, we've really got to understand that the natural ecological infrastructure is really at the heart of a lot of the disasters we're facing right now. And a lot of those are perpetuated by bad practices and use of chemicals and things like that. So soil is the name of the game. And whatever you can do to get your country program, your headquarters, your technical teams to understand that when we as agencies address soil, then we're doing 2 things. We're not only contributing to climate mitigation, but we're also contributing to climate adaptation. So when we have a nature positive relationship with soil, we're solving a huge number of problems. But the point is to ensure that this becomes a priority for everyone in the agency, from the operations teams to the technical teams. And that means water and sanitation, food security, livelihoods, protection teams, whoever that might be.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Nat. I want to turn, we have a great question coming from our colleague Thomas Cole, who I know has been working on similar work both with SCALE and through African Women Rising. And he asks, how can this approach link to or support some of the market systems development programs in the food security space that primarily focus on markets, improve seeds, and input suppliers? So how do we see these two approaches meeting? Lauren, I'll start with you.
Hey, great. Thank you. Thanks, Tom, for your good question. You know, when I step back and look at any type of agricultural endeavor, it is completely reliant on the geology, hydrology, and the biology that's integrated into it. So whenever whether it's a nutritional program or a markets program, one of the things we have to look at is how stable is the ecology that's sustaining that growing system so that it can provide for them for markets. And one of the things we find is that we can apply these same principles like Natalie was showing us around the permagarden farm that was in Atego Village, is we can apply the same water harvesting principles, the same soil building principles. And interestingly is to look at the local potential for local crops. And you know, one of the things that often gets missed by a lot of these big market development programs, systems development programs, is that they look at the big crops that come in and that are harvested once a year, but they often miss that there's a potential for like a weekly crop that could be intercropped within those main crops like maize. There's so many things that can grow within maize and actually boost the health of the maize. And so what we're finding is bringing in multiple forms of income through biodiversity in our planting systems actually boosts the resilience of that farmer, because they're no longer reliant on one particular crop that's going to possibly, they've gotten into debt to be able to produce and have one harvest. We're also providing with this intercropping that can provide weekly incomes, other perennial sources of income as well as nutrition. And when that comes together, because to have a healthy ecology, it also needs to be biodiverse. So we literally see less inputs needed in these types of systems because we have the health of the plants is better, which interprets or translates into less disease and less pest infestation. And so there's a direct, you know, I'm always talking with farmers, it's let's put less money into developing the system so we have higher profits on the other end, and to enable the ecology to actually work for them. So they actually have workers on their farm, which is the natural processes and natural patterns. And when you get that right in your design, you start to see stabilization in nutrition and stabilization in income because the ecology is stabilized. Natalie?
Hey, Nat, you're still on mute.
For me, it's really simple. Focus on the outputs, not on the inputs. A lot of market systems development programs are trying to figure out how to get some probably unethical product to a poor farmer to increase their yields. When we focus on regenerative systems, we're doing a couple of things. You know, in a conventional system, the more you put in fertility, you know, and fertilizers and all this stuff, over time, your energy and resources that you have to invest increases while your yields and fertility decrease. And when we focus on regenerative systems, it's exactly the opposite, right? The amount of capital energy in the upfront is higher because we're designing and getting in, you know, plants and everything. But over time, the system kicks into autopilot. So you have this biological uplift, the fertility and yields go up and your energy and investment goes down. So why would we not do that? A lot of market systems focus on getting you know, improve seeds and inputs into the farmer. I would say, okay, let me give you an example of my apartment. When I have waste, like paper waste or a potato peel or a carrot peel, that becomes worm food. You know, earthworm compost, it becomes compost, liquid compost, spirulina, food for my garden. I will disclose to you right now, a little secret. I have about 20 bottles of liquid organic biofertilizer that I make from prawn shells and crab shells and animal waste and I don't know where to put it. I don't have, I need market facilitation to create all the products I'm producing from waste. So that brings me to the point about circularity, right? There are so many opportunities for farmers to build. And when I say farmers, I mean men and women. I think we think of men when we hear the word farmer often. So men and women who need to understand soil life and how to build that fertility. And if I can say, if the technology around seeds is so great, if it's so life-saving, why are we not training farmers to do it? Why are we not engaging in participatory plant breeding systems? Why are we not bringing the technology and knowledge or extracting and harvesting the indigenous ways of doing that rather than trying to provide a product for sale? So I think for me, it comes back down to food security is not a function of the market, but where we want to link it to life, it should not be, right? Because markets fail, our stomachs don't fail. My stomach doesn't care at all about the market, it just wants to eat. So, we have to focus on the outputs. When a farmer has all of these amazing, now diverse products, how can we link them and do that market facilitation so that whether it's within or outside of their bioregion, they have much more access to market. I know I had other points, but there's all kinds of notifications flying, probably telling me to wrap it up. So thanks.
Yeah, unfortunately, as usual, the time just kind of flies by. So I'm going to ask in just a second, I'll turn over to Warren and then Nat for just one quick final thought. But I wanted to turn for everyone's attention from our participants to the link that Jenny Morgan just shared to please fill out a very quick evaluation form that's really helpful for us to know how we can hit the mark in continuing to support these kind of conversations. So Warren, if you could just a quick final thought, and then over to you, Nat.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just am so hopeful with the work that ourselves and many, many other people and organizations and movements have been doing around regeneration and really looking at how to be nature positive and how we develop how we live on the land. I think it's interesting. Like Natalie was saying, we do the same thing at our own homes and our own farms here in America that we're bringing to places like Uganda, like where Atego Village is. So when we go into the village, we're saying this is also what we're doing at home, and it's something that brings us together in a different way. And so I have yet to see a regenerative system actually. Basically, I see a regenerative system that doesn't build the resilience of the communities that are a part of it. So I think it's right at the core of resilience, and that's why we call it resilience design, and it's called many other things. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Nat, for a final comment.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the point of, a lot of the disasters we're facing in East Africa and around the world are contributed to by climate change, but our focus right now has to be on the land where we are with communities where we are to create the conditions to help communities be more resilient to all types of shocks and stresses, conflict. The stability that comes from healthy, vital agro ecosystems can be the basis for peaceful, stable communities that are water secure, food secure, soil, seed secure, heritage secure. And also, I really wanted to shout out, I can see so many East Africans on this panel, or on this chat. We have so many powerfully knowledgeable East Africans who are very active in their communities. They don't always get this forum, but I think wherever we are, we have to raise green local voices. So really, again, find those champions. Many of them are on this list. Precious Piri is here. Hi, Precious. So many great people. Let's support the building of movements of our East African colleagues so that they can have what they need to move this forward in their own communities. So I think that's my last thought. Everybody get to work, go dig, go plant trees, and honor water. Thanks.
Thanks again, Nat and Warren, for the excellent presentations. We're having tons of requests for more information. And so I want to point everyone to our contact slide here. We'll also follow up with all of you with the recording, with a number of links and key resources. You can also check out fsnnetwork.org/scale, which is where SCALE is continually turning out some of our resources, our partner resources, and we're always eager to hear from all of you. So lots of ways to stay engaged and to continue to learn from one another. So with that, I think we're going to have to wrap. So I just want to thank everyone once again, Nat, Warren, the donors and partners whose efforts went into this work, all of the team members that we can't call out individually who really had, you know, the sweat and the muscle and the brains behind putting this in action. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to staying in touch. Stay safe and take care.